They fired me at 4:55 p. right after a celebration I organized. No warning, just a calendar ping. Quick sync in Confroom 7. I thought it was about the East Africa licensing model. We'd just landed Kenya. But when I saw the HR lady and VP Legal already seated, I knew. My name is Grace Whitman. 3 years ago, I built the foundation for what would become the world's most advanced AI diagnostic system. Yesterday, I brought it to its knees with 7 keystrokes. Leo didn't even look at me when he said it. Biometry IQ is moving in a different direction, he stated, eyes fixed on the termination papers splayed across the conference table. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. Not Grace, we're letting you go. Not Grace, this is difficult. Just cold corporate script from the man who once brought me coffee at 3 a.m. While I debugged our first prototype, the man who had stood in my kitchen 6 months before, drunk on cheap wine and our Series C funding announcement, promising we'd change medicine forever. The HR woman, Denise, I think, pushed a folder toward me. Your severance details, 2 months salary, continuation of benefits until August, standard NDA and non-compete. I didn't touch it. You're terminating me 5 minutes before the weekend? I asked. After I just organized the Kenya licensing launch? Leo finally looked up, his face a practiced mask of regretful professionalism. The timing is unfortunate. Unfortunate, I repeated. The word hung in the air like smoke. Your company keycard will deactivate at midnight, VP Legal said. It will monitor your account activity until then. I nodded, stood up, and walked out without signing anything. I heard Denise call after me about exit procedures, but I was already halfway to the elevator. My mind wasn't on the folder or the severance or even the humiliation. It was on Clause X7. And the 7 lines of code I'd written 3 years ago. I knew then exactly what I would do. When we founded Biometry IQ, I wasn't Grace Whitman, soon-to-be pariah of the biotech industry. I was just a Georgia Tech grad with carpal tunnel syndrome and an idea about neural pathway mapping that nobody thought would work. Nobody except Leo Drummond. We met at a hackathon in Austin. I was building a prototype for algorithmic disease recognition. He was pitching investors. By 4 a.m., we'd merged our projects and written a business plan on the back of a Whataburger napkin. 6 months later, we had our first $1 million in seed funding and a cramped office above a taco shop on 6th Street. Those early days were nothing but adrenaline and possibility. We worked 90-hour weeks, slept on office couches, and lived on terrible coffee and the conviction that we were building something revolutionary. Our AI diagnostic system, what would eventually become Metascan, started as my passion project. I designed the core architecture, the neural networks, the decision trees that would eventually process millions of medical images with 99.7% accuracy. Leo was our front man. He charmed investors, negotiated with hospitals, and sold our vision while I built the reality behind it. We were the perfect team. His charisma, my code, his dreams, my execution. You're the wizard, he used to tell me. I just wear the fancy hat. The first time our system correctly diagnosed a rare form of lymphoma that 3 human radiologists had missed. We celebrated by dancing around the office to "Stayin' Alive." The irony wasn't lost on us. We were saving lives with algorithms and mathematics. We were changing medicine. By year 2, we'd expanded to 38 employees and moved to a gleaming office in downtown Austin with a view of Lady Bird Lake. Our system was being tested in 7 major U.S. hospitals. Venture capital firms were fighting to get into our funding rounds. That's when I created what would become known internally as the Intercontinental IP Licensing Kernel. The system that would allow us to deploy our technology globally while protecting our intellectual property. It was complex, elegant, and, as I would later learn, the only reason the company would eventually be valued at $2.6 billion. It was also when I wrote Clause X7. The clause wasn't malicious. It was protective. In the early days, when it was just Leo and me against the world, we'd agreed that major decisions would always require both our signatures. As we grew, that principle got lost in the crush of expansion and ambition. So I encoded it into our international patent framework. Any change to our global licensing infrastructure would require dual authentication, one from the company, one from the original engineer. Me? It's a failsafe. I explained to Leo when I showed him the code. Prevents any rogue actor from licensing our tech to, say, North Korea. He laughed and signed off on it without reading the documentation. Whatever you say, Grace, you're the genius. I didn't tell him the complete truth, that I'd written the clause because I was starting to see something change in him. The Leo who had once been a brilliant engineer was disappearing into boardrooms and investor dinners. He was becoming more CEO than coder, more businessman than builder. And I was becoming less partner, more asset. The transformation happened gradually, then suddenly, like bankruptcy or falling out of love. First came the restructuring that moved me from CTO to Chief Innovation Officer. A fancy title that meant I no longer attended executive meetings. Then the strategic hire of Brandon Mitchell, a Stanford MBA who became Leo's new right hand. Then the gradual exclusion from decisions about the very technology I had created. But the real betrayal came with Camila Rios. She arrived 9 months before my firing. Stanford computer science, sharp, ambitious, and 15 years younger than me. Leo introduced her as a rising star in AI architecture and assigned her to collaborate on Metascan's next generation. Within weeks, she had her own team. Within months, she was presenting my ideas, slightly modified, repackaged, in meetings I wasn't invited to. I'd see slides with my algorithms, renamed and recolored, labeled as Rio's Method or Next Gen Approach. It's collaborative development, Leo said when I confronted him. We're building on your foundation. Grace, that's how progress works. But I knew what was happening. I was being replaced, systematically and deliberately. The woman who had built the company's crown jewel was becoming obsolete, at least in their narrative. Then came the email about IP reclassification. It arrived on a Tuesday morning from legal, buried in a stack of routine updates and policy revisions. A minor modification to internal IP designation protocols. Most people would have skimmed it, signed electronically, and moved on. But I read every word. They were trying to amend Clause X.7 to remove the dual authentication requirement for international licensing. My signature was needed to approve the change, as per the very system they were trying to dismantle. I signed it, with a modification. I approved the change for domestic operations only, leaving the international framework intact. A small notation, easily missed. They didn't notice. That night, I worked until 3 a.m. ensuring that my access to the international licensing system remained intact. I created a backdoor. A simple protocol hidden within thousands of lines of code. If user primary, whiten she null, revoke all. If my user status was ever set to inactive, the system would automatically revoke all international licenses until manually reset with dual authentication. It wasn't malicious, I told myself. It was insurance. 3 weeks before they fired me, Leo stopped using my name. The original system architect thinks we should delay the Japan rollout, he said in a meeting, as if I weren't sitting 3 seats away. We need feedback from the initial developer on these modifications. He'd email, copying me and 5 other people. I became a function, not a person. The original architect, the initial developer, the legacy engineer. My access to certain systems began to disappear. Server consolidation, it explained, security protocol updates. I watched as Camila Rios became the new face of BiometriIQ's technology. She gave the TechCrunch interview about our revolutionary approach to medical AI. She presented at the healthcare conference in London, where we announced our expansion to European markets. All while using my architecture, my code, my life's work. I said nothing. I smiled in meetings, collaborated when asked, and organized the celebration for our Kenya licensing agreement, our first entry into African markets. I ordered champagne and catered food and stood applauding as Leo announced that Biometer IQ was now operating on 5 continents. 5 hours later, they fired me in conference room 7. I didn't go home after the firing. I went to Zilker Park and sat by the water, watching joggers circle the trail as the sun set. My phone buzzed with texts from colleagues who had heard the news. I ignored them all. At 8:30, I walked to a coffee shop with reliable Wi-Fi, ordered an Americano, and opened my laptop. First, I checked my email. My Biometer IQ accounts were already disabled. They hadn't even waited until midnight. But they'd forgotten about the developer portal I'd created 3 years ago, the one that connected directly to our international licensing infrastructure. It used a separate authentication system, one that existed outside the company's main IT framework. I logged in. My credentials still worked. I navigated to the system administration panel and checked my user status. As expected, someone had changed it from active primary to inactive legacy, the trigger condition for my failsafe. For a moment, I hesitated. What I was about to do would affect hospitals and medical facilities across the world. It would potentially impact patient care in 38 countries. It would certainly tank Biometer IQ's stock and trigger international regulatory scrutiny. But then I remembered Leo's face in the conference room, the coldness, the erasure of 3 years of partnership and innovation, the systematic replacement and rewriting of my contribution. I executed the command. User primary, behårt null. Then I closed my laptop, paid for my coffee, and went home to sleep for 12 uninterrupted hours. The cascade began at 3:17 Central Time. The system did exactly what I'd designed it to do. As international facilities attempted to access Metascan during their working hours, they received authentication errors. First Japan and Australia, then Germany, France, and the UK, then Canada and Brazil. By the time I woke up at 9 a.m., Biometer IQ was in full crisis mode. My phone had 27 missed calls, from Leo, from IT, from legal, from numbers I didn't recognize. My email inbox was flooded with urgent messages, including one from the system itself, alerting the original architect that international licensing protocols have entered restricted mode. I made coffee and turned on CNBC. Sure enough, Biometer IQ was the lead business story. Medical AI giant faces global system shutdown. Stock plummets 31% in pre-market trading. The financial analyst looked appropriately grave. Sources inside the company describe it as a catastrophic licensing failure. Hospitals in 38 countries are reporting complete loss of access to the Metascan diagnostic system. Biometer IQ has issued a statement calling it a temporary technical disruption. But regulatory agencies in the EU and Japan are already launching investigations into whether patient data has been compromised. I sipped my coffee and waited. Leo called again at 10:22. This time, I answered. "What did you do?" His voice was a controlled fury. "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly. "The system is functioning as designed. When the primary user is deactivated, international licensing enters protected status. It's all in the documentation. Page 147 of the IP framework I wrote 3 years ago. Fix it. Not a request, a command. I can't. I'm no longer employed by Biometer IQ. Remember, any attempt to access company systems would violate the terms of separation." Silence on the line. Then, "We need your signature, Grace, just to unlock it temporarily." I watched a cardinal land on my balcony railing, bright red against the morning sky. "You deleted me from your roadmap," I said quietly. "I deleted you from the system. Do you understand what you're doing? Patients rely on our technology. Hospitals have backup systems and human radiologists." I finished for him. "No one is being harmed, Leo, just inconvenienced. Like I was inconvenienced yesterday at 4:55 p.m. We'll sue you for this." "For what?" "The system is functioning according to its documented protocols. Protocols that legal approved, that you signed off on." I'm simply declining to help fix a problem with a company I no longer work for. Another silence. What do you want, Grace? At last, my name. Nothing from you, I said, and hung up. The next week was a blur of legal consultations, careful documentation, and strategic planning. While Biometric IQ scrambled to regain control of its international infrastructure, I was laying the groundwork for what would come next. I knew they would eventually find a workaround. Brilliant engineers always do. But it would take time, weeks, maybe months. And during that time, the company's reputation and value would suffer immensely. On day 3 of the crisis, I received an unexpected visitor, Meera Patel. Biometric IQ's compliance officer and one of the few colleagues I genuinely respected, stood on my doorstep holding a bottle of wine. I'm not here officially, she said before I could speak. I quit this morning. I let her in. We opened the wine. It's chaos, she told me, curled up on my couch. The EU regulators are threatening to revoke our operating license permanently. The Japanese Ministry of Health is launching a formal investigation. And the stock? She winced. It's down 47% and falling. And Leo? The board called an emergency meeting yesterday. He's on thin ice. She sipped her wine. Everyone knows it was you, Grace. No one's saying it officially, but everyone knows. And what do they think? Meera smiled for the first time. Half the engineering team is secretly impressed. The other half is terrified. She leaned forward. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I have information you should know. She told me about Project Phoenix, Biometric IQ's planned next-generation system that would replace Metascan entirely. A system based entirely on my architecture, but stripped of the safeguards I'd built in. A system designed to collect and monetize patient data in ways I'd always refused to consider. They're 3 months from launch, Meera said. And they're cutting corners on privacy, on security, on everything that you prioritized. I felt cold despite the warm evening. Who else knows about this? Sean from Back-End Security figured it out. He's been raising red flags for weeks. They're about to push him out too. And there's a junior analyst, Caleb, who compiled the data that convinced me something was wrong. I refilled our glasses. Are they looking for jobs? Meera raised an eyebrow. Why? Are you hiring? I smiled. I might be. Whitman Protocol Systems Incorporated 1 month after my firing from Biometric IQ. Our mission statement was simple: secure ethical AI systems for healthcare, built by the engineers who know where the bodies are buried. Perhaps not the most professional tagline, but it got attention. We started small. Me, Meera handling compliance and legal, Sean rebuilding security architecture, and Caleb analyzing market opportunities. We worked from my living room for the first month, then moved to a modest office in East Austin, far from Biometric IQ's downtown glass tower. Our first client was a hospital in Toronto that had been left stranded by the Biometric IQ licensing crisis. We built them a diagnostic system from scratch, more transparent, more secure, and paradoxically, more accurate than Metascan. Word spread. By month 3, we had clients in 6 countries. By month 6, 22. We didn't advertise. We didn't need to. The story, though never officially confirmed, had become tech industry legend. Hospitals and medical institutions came to us specifically because they'd heard I was the architect behind the original system, but had built something better, something that prioritized patient outcomes over corporate control. I rebuilt everything from the ground up. No shortcuts. No reused code that might trigger IP disputes. A completely new system, designed around core principles that the original Biometric IQ had gradually abandoned: transparency, security, and human oversight. We called it MetaLink. Unlike Metascan, which operated as a black box, MediLink showed doctors its reasoning process, allowed them to trace diagnostic pathways, and incorporated their feedback to improve. And most importantly, it was designed to be unkillable. Distributed architecture, multiple redundancies, no single point of failure, no one person, not even me, could shut it down. Meanwhile, BiometriQ was imploding. They'd managed to restore international operations after 6 weeks of frantic engineering, but the damage was done. Clients had fled, regulators had imposed sanctions, and investors had lost confidence. Leo was removed as CEO 3 months after my firing. Project Phoenix was quietly canceled. The company laid off 40% of its workforce, including Camila Rios. I sent her a job offer the same day. She declined. 10 months after Conference Room 7, I sat in a convention hall in Geneva, preparing to sign the International Medical AI Accord, a new framework for ethical AI deployment in healthcare, created in direct response to the BiometriQ incident, as it was now known. I had been invited as an expert consultant, one of 12 engineers helping draft protocols that would prevent any single entity from controlling critical medical infrastructure. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I reviewed the final document, a familiar figure appeared in my peripheral vision. Grace. Leo looked older, tired around the eyes. His expensive suit hung slightly loose, as if he'd lost weight. Leo, I acknowledged, not looking up from my papers. Your new company is doing well, I hear. It is. He shifted uncomfortably. I'm consulting now, helping smaller firms navigate the new regulatory landscape. The landscape his failures had created. I said nothing. I wanted to tell you, he began, then stopped, started again. What happened at BiometriQ was entirely predictable. I finished for him. You built a company on my architecture, then tried to remove the architect. The building collapsed. I finally looked up at him. Basic engineering. He nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I was wrong. About everything. Yes, I agreed. You were. A Swiss official approached, indicating it was time for the signing ceremony. I gathered my papers. Grace, Leo said as I stood to leave. One last question. How did you know that the system would respond exactly as it did? I smiled for the first time. I didn't just write the code, Leo. I wrote the code that wrote the code. I built the system to protect itself, and by extension, me. I walked away without waiting for his response. The signing ceremony was brief and formal. 12 engineers and developers from around the world, establishing new standards for an industry that had learned its lesson the hard way. When it was my turn to sign, I added a personal note on the final page of my copy. A message that would never appear in the official record, but would remind me of how far I'd come. Some systems don't need restarting. Outside the convention center, spring was arriving in Geneva. The lake shimmered in the distance, and the mountains stood sentinel against the blue sky. My phone buzzed with messages from my team back in Austin, updates on projects, questions about implementations, ideas for the future. I silenced it and found a cafe by the water. Ordered coffee. Watched the swans glide across the surface. 3 years ago, I had built something revolutionary, only to be pushed aside when it became valuable. Yesterday, I had helped ensure no one else would suffer the same fate. Tomorrow, I would continue building better systems, stronger safeguards, more ethical foundations. But today, just for this moment, I allowed myself to savor the simple, undeniable truth. They had fired me while my name was still on the patent. And I had rewritten the ending